Chapter 2 of Cocoa and Chocolate. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. Cocoa and Chocolate, Their History from Plantation to Consumer by Arthur W. Knapp. Chapter 2. Cacao and its Cultivation. How seldom do we think, when we drink a cup of cocoa or eat some morsels of chocolate, that our liking for these delicacies has set minds and bodies at work all the world over. Many types of humanity have contributed to their production. Picture in the mind's eye the graceful coolie in the sun-saturated tropics, moving in the shade, cutting the pods from the cacao tree; the deep-chested sailor, helping to unload from lighters or surf boats the precious bags of cacao into the hold of the ocean liner; the skillful workman roasting the beans until they fill the room with a fine aroma; and the girl with dexterous fingers packing the cocoa or fashioning the chocolate in curious and delicate forms. To the black and brown races, the negroes and the East Indians, we owe a debt for their work on tropical plantations, for the harder manual work would be too arduous for Europeans unused to the heat of those regions. Climate necessary. Cacao can only grow at tropical temperatures, when shielded from the wind and unimpaired by drought. Enthusiasts, as a hobby, have grown the tree under glass in England. It requires a warmer temperature than either tea or coffee, and only after infinite care can one succeed in getting the tree to flower and bear fruit. The mean temperature in the countries in which it thrives is about 80° Fahrenheit in the shade, and the average of the maximum temperatures is seldom more than 90° Fahrenheit, or the average of the minimum temperatures less than 70° Fahrenheit. The rainfall can be as low as 45 inches per annum, as in the Gold Coast, or as high as 150 inches, as in Java, provided the fall is uniformly distributed. The ideal spot in the secluded vale, and whilst in Venezuela there are plantations up to 2,000 feet above sea level, cacao cannot generally be profitably cultivated above 1,000 feet. Factors of geographical distribution. Climate, soil, and manures determine the possible region of cultivation. The extent to which the area is utilized depends on the enterprise of man. The original home of cacao was the rich tropical region, far famed in Elizabethan days, that lies between the Amazon and the Orinoco, and but for the enterprise of man, it is doubtful if it would have ever spread from this region. Monkeys often carry the beans many miles. Man, the master monkey, has carried them round the world. First, the Indians spread cacao over the tropical belt of the American continent and cultivated it as far north as Mexico. Then came the Spanish explorers of the New World, who carried it from the mainland to the adjacent West Indian islands. Cacao was planted by them in Trinidad as early as 1525. Since that date it has been successfully introduced into many a tropical island. It was an important day in the history of Ceylon when Sir R. Horton in 1834 had cacao plants brought to that island from Trinidad. The carefully packed plants survived the ordeal of a voyage of 10,000 miles. The most recent introduction is, however, the most striking. About 1880 a native of the Gold Coast obtained some beans, probably from Ferdinando Po. In 1891 the first bag of cacao was exported. It weighed 80 pounds. In 1915, 24 years later, the export from the Gold Coast was 120 million pounds. Tropical vegetation appears so bizarre to the visitor from temperate climates that in such surroundings the cacao tree seems almost commonplace. It is in appearance as moderate and unpretentious as an apple tree, though somewhat taller, being, when full grown, about 20 feet high. It begins to bear in its fourth or fifth year. Smooth in its early youth, as it gets older it becomes covered with little bosses cushions from which many flowers spring. I saw one fellow, very tall and gnarled, and with many pods on it. Turning to the planter, I inquired, "How old is that tree?" He replied almost reverentially, "It's a good deal older than I am, must be at least 50 years old. It's one of the tallest cacao trees I've ever seen. I wonder—" The planter perceived my thought, and said, "I'll have it measured for you." It was 40 feet high. That was a tall one. Usually they are not more than half that height. The bark is reddish gray, and may be partly hidden by brown, gray and green patches of lichen. The bark is both beautiful and quaint, but in the main the tree owes its beauty to its luxuriance of prosperous leaves and its quaintness to its pods. The flowers, leaves and fruit. Although cacao trees are not unlike the fruit trees of England, there are differences which, when first one sees them, cause expressions of surprise and pleasure to leap to the lips. One sees what one never saw before, the fruit springing from the main trunk, quite close to the ground. An old writer has explained that this is due to a wise providence, because the pod is so heavy that if it hung from the end of the branches it would fall off before it reached maturity. The old writer talks of providence. A modern writer would see in the same facts a simple example of evolution. On the same cacao tree every day of the year may be found flowers, young podkins and mature pods side by side. I say found advisedly. At the first glance one does not see the flowers because they are so dainty and so small. The buds are the size of rice grains, and the flowers are not more than half an inch across when the petals are fully out. The flowers are pink or yellow, of wax-like appearance, and have no odor. They were commonly stated to be pollinated by thrips and other insects. Dr. von Faber of Java has recently shown that whilst self-pollination is the rule, cross-fertilization occurs between the flowers on adjacent or interlocking trees. These graceful flowers are so small that one can walk through a plantation without observing them, although an average tree will produce 6,000 blossoms in a year. Not more than 1% of these will become fruit. Usually it takes 6 months for the bud to develop into the mature fruit. The lovely mosses that grow on the stems and branches are sometimes so thick that they have to be destroyed, or the fragile cacao flower could not push its way through. Whilst the flowers are small, the leaves are large, being as an average about a foot in length and 4 inches in breadth. The cacao tree never appears naked, save on the rare occasions when it is stripped by the wind, and the leaves are green all the year round, save when they are red, if the reader will pardon an Hibernicism. And indeed there is something contrary in the crimson tint, for whilst we usually associate this with old leaves about to fall, with the cacao, as with some rose trees, it is the tint of young leaves. The fruit, which hangs on a short, thick stalk, may be anything in shape from a melon to a stumpy, irregular cucumber, according to the botanic variety. The intermediate shape is like a lemon, with furrows from end to end. There are pods called calabacillo, smooth and ovate like a calabash, and there are others more rare, so knobbly that they are well named alligator. The pods vary in length from 5 to 11 inches, with here and there the great pod of all, the blood red Sangre Tora. The colors of the pods are as brilliant as they are various. They are rich and strong, and resemble those of the rind of the pomegranate. One pod shows many shades of dull crimson, another grades from gold to yellow of leather, and yet another is all lacklustre pea green. They may be likened to Chinese lanterns hanging in the woods. One does not conclude from the appearance of the pod that the contents